story, let's begin. The world is fine, come on, dive in. The future's here, it's right before your eyes. Step by step, you're on your way. Welcome to a brighter day. Don't you know it feels good to be alive?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Petshap webinar series. Tonight, it's just family, and I am joined by Petshap CEO and co-founder, Tom Jenkins. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Lewis. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be here too. So tonight, you're going to be discussing something a little bit weird, a little bit concept. Can you tell us more about why you decided to talk about this tonight?
Well, I think mutability has always been relevant to business, and it's a hobby of mine to take overall biological analogies and apply them to business. But with mutations being very much in the news, it seemed more relevant than ever, really.
Well, I guess there's no better time to start talking about it than now. So do you want to share your screen and we'll get started?
Sure, how's that?
Fantastic, we're all good to go.
Good stuff. So, as I was saying, mutability has been front of mind recently as we have been confronted with the new coronavirus variants. However, I want to persuade you that mutability is as much the solution as it is the problem, particularly for your business. I am going to seek to persuade you of this by addressing a question few of you will ever have thought to ask. Is your business a cat or a dog? I first gave this talk at the Veterinary Innovation Summit in Colorado 2 or 3 years ago now, but it seems all the more relevant today. Let's start with a quotation from the founder of Amazon, no less. In business, what's dangerous is not to evolve. I'm a proud alumnus of Christ's College, Cambridge, where Charles Darwin studied. So it's with a heavy heart that I add my weight to those misquoting the great man. He definitely never said, it's not the strongest of the companies that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. But it's convenient for us to pretend that he did. It doesn't really matter because the bigger question is what's driving this change? Back to Jeff. Jeff believes that the single key selection pressure in the modern business environment is customer expectations. He says, one thing I love about customers is that they are divinely discontent. Their expectations are never static, they go up. It's human nature. We didn't ascend from our hunter-gatherer days by being satisfied. People have a voracious appetite for a better way, and yesterday's wow quickly becomes today's ordinary. So with rising customer expectations creating a dynamic selection environment, we're left with a stark choice: evolve or die. I know which I prefer, but it seems like the sort of thing that's easier said than done. I mean, how does one evolve? Well, we know one key ingredient is variation. Evolution requires variation in order to occur. Genetic variation is produced through mutation. Mutations can be of no consequence, of detriment, or more rarely of benefit to the organism and offspring of the organism involved. So the ability of organisms to mutate, their mutability, drives evolution. And this brings us to cats and dogs. Dogs are more mutable than cats. That is to say, they are more likely to mutate. I mean, just look at them. Look at the sheer variety of dog breeds. They started as wolves, but became Great Danes, Dachshunds, and everything in between. Cats can have slightly pointier faces or flatter faces, long hair, short hair, or no hair, but they're always and indelibly cats. It turns out there's a reason for this. Dogs have slippery DNA sequences which give rise to errors of replication, leading to higher rates of germline mutations. This means dogs have relatively high mutability. In selecting for organisms best adapted to survive and replicate in a given niche, there is selection pressure for not only the favorably mutated gene itself, but also the genetic architecture that gave rise to the mutation. So if an organism finds itself in a rapidly changing environment, the genetic propensity to mutate and thus have a higher chance of its offspring being better adapted to the changed environment is itself an advantage. In this way, mutability is a heritable trait subject to selection. Simple sequence repeats, also known as genetic stutters, is an example of genetic architecture, potentially providing resiliency for adaptation. And the stutter on stutter there was not intentional. A long sequence of the same nucleotide seems to confuse the DNA polymerase enzyme, leading to errors in replication, which can give rise to germline mutations. Such genetic architecture will, in a stable environment, likely confer a disadvantage, but it will become more favorable and selected for much more strongly in the most dynamic environments. So, the greater the pressure to change, the more mutability becomes a desirable trait. Victorian dog breeders provided a more dynamic selection environment for dogs than for cats. Think of all we ask of dogs: herd these sheep, guard that house, catch that rat, retrieve that duck, etc., etc. Cats, well, we prefer not to trouble them too much. All of this provides a strong biological analogy for organizational adaptability and survival. It seems likely that those organizations emerging from more dynamic environments will for some time carry relatively high mutability. However, mutations are almost always of detriment to organisms currently well adapted to their environment. Analogously, organizations will be rewarded for being flexible, or rather mutable, right up until they achieve product market fit, but will then come under pressure to shed their mutability to protect the stability of their competitive advantage within their niche. This leaves them vulnerable should the environment change again in the future. But if you don't make hay while the sun shines, when will you? And that's important to know. Mutability is not in and of itself necessarily a desirable thing. It's not mutable company good, immutable company bad. It's context dependent. I have this can of new Coke, which isn't new at all. It's actually older than me. Don't worry, I'm not going to drink it. In the 1980s, as Coke was approaching its 100th year of producing sugar water to a carefully guarded recipe, Coke executives got spooked by Pepsi's blind taste test campaign, forgetting that the majority of their consumers are presumably not blindfolded when making purchasing decisions. Anyway, some unthinking prompted the unthinkable. They changed the formula. They made it sweeter and launched new Coke, taking the original formula off the shelves, and the consumer backlash was immediate and unforgiving, with old cola drinkers of America forming a pressure group with genuine punch. So mutability bad, but their newfound mutability meant they were able to quickly reverse their decision, and old Coke was soon back on the shelves, selling better than ever, and new Coke was quietly discontinued. To the reporter who wondered whether this was all an elaborate PR stunt, one Coke exec retorted, "The truth is, we are not that dumb and we are not that smart." Then again, mutability gave us Diet Coke, which has been a smash hit success. Like I said, it's context dependent. Okay, so at this point, I know what you're thinking. Well, those of you still awake. When he says mutability, he means innovation. No, there's more to mutability than just innovation. Innovation is important, sure, and can certainly be a component of mutability within organizations. However, innovation alone is insufficient and arguably sometimes not even necessary. It is well known that Kodak researchers were pioneers in the field of digital photography. Similarly, Xerox invested in research culminating in the first computer mouse. it is equally well documented that neither company benefited from the fruits of their innovative labor. They innovated but did not mutate. Kodak, for example, made far too much money manufacturing camera film for it to embrace digital opportunities. That is to say, pre-existing adaptations yielding competitive advantage meant the opportunity costs of making strategic commitments to the new innovations were too high until it was too late, by which point the initially less attractive but growing niche had already been filled by a peppy little mutant without the privilege or burden of such opportunity costs. Think Instagram and Apple in its early days. Indeed, it shouldn't escape our notice that Apple has been a key beneficiary of the emergence of the digital camera as well as the computer mouse, although neither innovation was born there. Apple is arguably more mutable than it is innovative. In organisms, mutations need to be phenotypically expressed directly or indirectly in order to be of consequence. In organizations, innovations need to become strategic initiatives in order to have any chance of filling an emerging niche in a dynamic environment. Okay, fair enough. But what's the point? Well, let me ask you a question. You can post your responses in the chat. Would you rather operate in an environment where A, you have dogs, but all your customers want cats, or B, where you have cats, but all your customers want dogs? You can vote now. A, you have dogs, you start with dogs, but your customers are asking for cats. Or B, you start with cats, but all your customers want dogs. Just give you a minute. Quick minute, let's move on. If you said A, you'd rather start with dogs, give yourself a bone. And that's because mutability is easier to lose than to acquire. This becomes obvious when you consider that the loss of a trait is itself a mutation, and mutability is a trait. So you have a better chance of breeding a cat-like dog than a dog-like cat. If you picked B, don't worry, I like cats too. And one thing that cats are very good at is getting others to do the hard work for them, much like bacteria. Again, bear with me. This is all going somewhere, I think. Bacteria are known to be able to co-opt the adaptations of their neighbors, acquiring antibiotic resistance, for example, through the transfer of plasmids, a process known as bacterial conjugation. This might seem like a random process, but I'd argue it's non-random. The bacteria available for conjugation are more likely than average to be adapted to their environment, because those ill-adapted to their environment are more likely to be dead. It strikes me that both cats and veterinary businesses could learn a lot from the humble bacteria. Look around you. Who is thriving? What are they doing that you're not? What can you learn? What could you co-opt? I think it was Picasso that said, "Great businesses steal." To give a real-world example of the dog-cat bacteria dynamics, let's talk about Netflix and poor old Blockbuster. Netflix's original business model was DVDs by post, but who watches anything on DVD anymore? Luckily, as the shift to online streaming happened, Netflix was still dog enough to evolve along with changing customer behaviors rather than die. Blockbuster, on the other hand, was thoroughly cat-like in its immutability, but without the benefit of 9 lives. Interestingly, it is rumored that Blockbuster had the opportunity to make like a bacterium and acquire Netflix for just $50 million. Pocket change, right? But that's got to hurt when you consider Netflix is now valued at, what, $250 billion? Crazy. However, Blockbuster just didn't seem to know it was a cat in need of conjugation. Lest I construct another false dichotomy, let's be clear. No business is all dog or all cat. All businesses exist on a spectrum of mutability, as do all organisms, to be fair, even cats and dogs. But the truth is, for a long time, veterinary clinics have operated in a relatively stable environment. Even the Great Recession couldn't stop us. And that's left a lot of us feeling rather feline. I'd argue there's nothing wrong with that. A lack of mutability gives some level of stability, and dependability. And pet owners need to be able to depend on veterinary practices to consistently provide a high standard of care and service. That's the core competence where the majority of the veterinary clinic's efforts should be focused. But we need self-awareness too. And to quote a Nobel laureate, the times, they are a-changing. And it's not just Blockbuster that has fallen victim to the ever more dynamic selection environment. The pressure for mutability is greater than ever, with the lifespan of the average S&P 500 company contracting from 60 years in 1958 to less than 20 years in 2012. As of 5 years ago, all 5 of the most valuable publicly listed companies in the world are tech companies. But less than a decade before that, not one of these companies was in the top 5. The cause of the truncated life expectancy? My diagnosis is technophagocosmosis, or as venture capitalist Mark Anderson put it, software is eating the world. Empowered by its bacteria-rivaling ability to rapidly iterate and evolve. Think about it. In the 20 minutes it takes bacteria to replicate, a software engineer can be changing and publishing a few lines of code which could improve the experience of millions, if not billions, of users worldwide with but a few clicks. With the availability of powerful open source libraries, this is easier than ever before. In other words, software has the inherent advantages of high mutability, conjugation, and all. By exploring digitalization opportunities, yes, like Petshap, within veterinary clinics, we can instill some level of mutability into veterinary practices, allowing you to more rapidly iterate on your customer service efforts, meaning without trying to be something you're not, your offering can evolve to meet rising customer expectations. And that's important because if one thing is certain, man's yesterday may ne'er be like his morrow. Naught may endure but mutability. I hope this webinar, these insights will help you and your teams capture tomorrow's wow. Lewis, are there any questions for me?
Gosh, you've covered quite a lot there in quite a short space of time. I think if I'm going to ask you a question, one of that, I think the question that I want to ask you is Petshap a cat or a dog? What are we? Where do we fit into all of this?
That's a great question. Is Petshap a cat or a dog? What do you think, Lewis?
I think you're going to want to say we're a scrappy dog who is trying to become everyone's lassie. We're sort of a young Yorkshire Terrier. I say everyone's veterinary clinic's lassie. Am I right? Am I on the money there?
You're bang on the money. That yes, as Petshap is a technology company, we have the benefits of mutability, right? And we can help veterinary clinics adapt.
That's super. I think we've definitely seen that, especially since we've created a product. God, it feels weird talking about us in this way. It's really exciting. We created a product that was built to fit the needs of veterinary clinics in 2019. And then suddenly at the start of 2020, it's become a major tool for clinics to evolve into the COVID-19 clinic.
And the use cases have changed, right? We didn't build this product for the pandemic. We built this product because we saw it as a better way of operating clinics, a way to do more for pets, more for their owners, but without requiring more of the veterinary team. And then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, clinics are closing. We're going into lockdown, and people are looking for a way to replace the lost revenue. How can we still serve our customers? How can our team still protect their jobs? And people are thinking, okay, so we've got to do virtual consults. And that we kind of already found out that there's limitations to video consulting through the earlier iterations of the product, but that's what people got on board with. And then they found the benefits of asynchronous text chat. And when things when the strict lockdown eased a little bit and they had all this pent up demand and reduced capacity because of social distancing, they saw the capacity utilization advantages of asynchronous chat. And so even within the product, the use case, it has this mutability where it can fit those needs, whether it's revenue enhancement, capacity utilization improvements, lead generation, whatever it might be.
God, the possibilities are quite boundless. And I think that's kind of one of the things that this webinar really goes into is that clinics need to sort of evolve to and mutate to adapt to oncoming challenges in that sense. Let's talk about the average veterinary clinic, if you can even say there's such a thing.
Yeah, is there such a thing? Yeah.
It's kind of a brave generalization. But in your opinion, would you say that they are a cat or a dog? If you're looking at your normal sort of one-sitter, couple of vets, it sounds like you're trying to say they're cats at the moment. And why should they be trying to be dogs? Seems like a lot of effort.
Yeah, I don't think they should be trying to be dogs. I think they are cats. I think I touched on this briefly, that mutability isn't a universally positive thing. Mutability is not something that everyone should aspire to. If you think it from like just a pure pragmatic business sense, every business, every startup, every business that comes into being is looking for a way to make money. We have higher missions, and that's a great thing in the veterinary sector. But ultimately, businesses need to make money, right? And so they're looking for a way to turn, let's say, £5 into £10, right? And established successful businesses have found a way to do this. That means that if they do anything else, if they invest in anything else, it's unlikely to provide the same return as the thing that is oriented around their core competence. Startups don't have that problem. They don't have that opportunity cost. They've not found their machine that turns £5 into £10. So they're innovating and they're changing and they're trying stuff, right? Until they find it. So if you've got your machine worked out, if you've got it factored in, you don't want to go changing everything. You don't want to launch new Coke, just sell the sugar water, guys. Like it's not rocket science. But we are in a dynamic selection environment. Times are changing. And so without suddenly pretending that we're a dog, without suddenly pretending that we've got this long track record of successful adaptation, what can we do to adapt to the changing circumstances? And that's why I highlighted the bacterial conjugation, because there are products and services out there that you can just acquire. You can bring them into your business and you can co-opt their mutability, their flexibility, to iterate on your existing customer experience, iterate on your current model, and adapt to that dynamic selection environment.
I think that's such an interesting point that you bring up about taking things that work to extend your business. And I think that's what Petshap does really well, right? We're there to digitally augment and extend a veterinary clinic, not to kind of do too much of a hard sell on a Wednesday evening. Is it Thursday evening?
Thursday evening. It all blurs into one.
That's lockdown for you. But I think that's the interesting thing I've learned from being in a tech company such as us, that it is about like trying to find things that allow you to serve the needs of your customers better and taking those on board. It's interesting you bring up the bacterial conjugation. We've got a question here from Philip, who says, love the animation of the bacterial conjugation. Am I saying that right? Have I got that right? Is that what it is?
You're saying it right. Yeah, good.
Yeah, there we go. So Phillips asks, companies don't have plasmids that they can steal from each other. So what are you trying to prove here? What's the thing that you're trying to articulate?
The plasmid, this circular DNA in this biological analogy, is a strategic initiative.
Okay.
What are other people implementing? What are they doing, right? If one practice is using Petshap to get their phone calls down, to improve the capacity, maybe they're doing it to acquire new clients, whatever it might be. If one clinic is, improving the lives of the nurses with these inpatient updates, how are they doing it? Is that something that you could do? Is that available to you? Like, you don't need to change who you are to do that. It's there, it's available to you, just as available to you as it is to them. And so look around you in your environment, look to your peers and say, what are they doing? This is why groups like Vet Dynamics are so valuable. These clinic owners, operators coming together and just comparing, what's working for you, what's not. And they're engaging in bacterial conjugation, whether they know it or not, whether they appreciate me terming it like that or not. That's what they're doing. And I would encourage everyone to do that.
So it kind of sounds like what you're suggesting is fancy terminology for best practice. and kind of making sure that you can, like you say, fit it into your existing business in the best way possible, but make it basically picking up on some great ideas. You spoke about groups like Vet Dynamics, and you've spoken about technology. Are there any other useful pools that people can look to for these plasmids that you speak of, these business plasmids that people can look to improve their business operation?
They're everywhere, Lewis. Like, I did a podcast recently where someone asked me for a book recommendation for business strategy or something like that. And I think I recommended Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy, who has a great line on product market fit, right? I recently read the autobiography of John Stuart Mill. Like, I think you can take inspiration if you're open to it. If you're thinking like, how can I conjugate? If you are applying those concepts when you're going through life with an open mind, you'll find inspiration from lots of different sources, but you have to be open to it. And I think sometimes we do get stuck in a trap of like business as usual. I think you said there's no such thing as an average veterinary clinic. And oh boy, do I agree, right? Every veterinary clinic has to overcome this almost insurmountable degree of operational complexity. Any species of animal could come through the door tied to any owner with any set of problems requiring any combination of thousands of products and services. So the possible combinations are like, you've got millions of combinations of products and services that could be dispensed at a moment's notice, right? That is an operationally complex business. And so often we think, okay, don't upset the apple cart. I've cracked it. Things seem to be sort of ticking over. Yeah, there's a few problems here and there, and I've applied bandages and band-aids and all that good stuff. But the idea that we can come at it with a fresh set of eyes, I think that's important. And remember that while you experience your business process, you experience the experience you're inflicting on customers every day. You experience that every day, but they don't. They don't really come to you with an expectation of what a veterinary visit looks like. Every single person you have walking in the door, you have an opportunity to redefine the customer experience. I'm not saying, I'm not saying be that scrappy little startup dog trying to, mutate to find his niche, but you can just tweak things and try things and just implement little ideas. It's been so cool to see the way veterinary businesses have introduced Petshap. And maybe they've started using it, let's say, for inpatient updates. So they started when someone comes in for a surgery, they'll message them with an update of their pet, eliminating the game of phone tag that is played when you told the owner, don't call us, we'll call you, but they inevitably call you and you're taking blood from a fractious cat, so you can't answer the phone, and you ring them back and they don't answer. So you get rid of that headache. That's step one. Okay, we did that. Wow, we not only survived that change, everyone loved it. It's improved the experience. It requires less of us. That's great. Let's try the next thing. Okay, what's the next thing? Well, how could we get, the phone is ringing off the hook, and we tell everyone they have to drop everything to prioritize the phone, but most of the time it's a vaccination price request, or it's someone ordering a bag of dog food. It's non-urgent queries that are interrupting my team. So, okay, let's change. Let's use asynchronous text chat now. So these little tweaks, if you have a source of mutability, however you've acquired that, whether it is through your own innovation or through conjugation, co-opting innovations elsewhere, you can just gradually iterate. I think that's very powerful.
It's interesting you say gradually iterate, because at one point I thought you were sort of suggesting a Frankenstein approach of sort of tying on new bits and pieces to create, there's this common allegory with something such as the NHS that people want to raise it to the ground instead and start afresh. And it's almost like that's kind of what I was hearing you say. But I think it is this lesson of doing things gradually and in a way that makes sense for your business, not to be sort of taken by the new shiny piece of equipment or the most dazzling. You've got to think how it works for you and meet you at the stage you're at in your business. I think that's so interesting the way you talk about that. We've had another question in from Rachel, who says, we're dealing with customer expectations that are rising all the time. And she says clinics are having to run fast just to stand still, particularly now more than ever. So aren't veterinary teams stretched enough as it is?
Of course they are. Yeah. But doing things a little bit differently doesn't mean doing more. That was very important to me when we were launching Petshap, that I felt we had a super compelling proposition for Connect owners and operators around what we talked about, revenue enhancement, capacity utilization improvements, lead generation, client acquisition, all these things. I thought we had a compelling proposition for pet owners, convenience, right? You're laying convenience on top of a high trust relationship. What's not to love? But then there's this team in the middle, right? And I know firsthand from operating veterinary clinics that you can have all the best intentions, all the best ideas in the world. If the team don't get on board with it, it's dead in the water. It's failed, right? And so you've got to have a what's in it for me. And communicating that's what's in it for me is really important. And if you are able to co-opt solutions that bring advantages to your team, whereby they can do more for pet owners, they can do more for pets, they can augment their existing patient advocacy efforts, but without requiring more of them, hopefully requiring less of them. Hopefully you find tools that mean they can get out for lunch on time, they can get home to their families on time. That's possible. We see people doing that. That is possible. And that's why you need to be open to these opportunities.
It's interesting you bring up teams, because how obviously when you're a manager of a veterinary clinic, you're really able to see, I can bring this piece in and it will really help our existing strategy and reach our targets quicker and more efficiently. How do you explain something like mutability to the entirety of the team, especially when you've got so many different roles? What sort of strategies do you take to ensure buy-in, that these sort of launches and integrations are a success?
I think probably don't talk about bacterial plasmids conjugation.
I would agree.
Yeah, that's probably not the place to start. Although this is being recorded and the link will be made available. The place to start is just you've got to think it through, and hopefully if you're working with a vendor, they will talk to you about how they've seen the use cases layered on in the way that gets that early adoption and then it sets you up for success in the future, right? I can only talk about where we've been successful in doing this. And when someone's first onboarded to Petshap, we help them with a onboarding campaign to get a good proportion of their patient population using the app. And that's usually sort of, 20% of pets using, pet owners using the app within the first 1 to 2 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And that makes it immediately relevant to the team, because suddenly they see inbound phone calls going down. The phone is no longer ringing off the hook. They see that queries coming in asynchronously. Hey, they've got 30, 60 minutes, maybe more to respond to it. Oh, I like that. Someone's asked me about vaccination prices via text chat. I was just about to get my lunch. You know what? The automated welcome message tells them that I've got 60 minutes to reply. So I'm going to have my lunch and come back when I'm my sugar levels are restored, and I'm going to do a better job. So those early wins are helpful, and then they will be your biggest advocates. They're the ones that then tell everyone, you really must download Petshap. It's so useful for ordering your medication. If you download Petshap, I'll be able to send you an inpatient update. And that's how you get to 50, 60% of your pet owners and pets using the app.
And then you discover things like, I can actually sell in more. Not to use the dreaded word of sell, but we can advocate for more pet health plan opportunities, or we can, there's been a lot of chatter about how nurses are super grateful because their visibility to pet owners has been so much higher. And I think that's really cool as well.
Yeah, you mentioned pet health plans. Okay, that's a non-Petshap example. That's a great example. Pet health plans, you implement them, and initially everyone's like, you want me to sell this bundle of stuff, I don't really want to talk about it. But who's happiest about working in a clinic with high pet health plan penetration? Vets and vet nurses. Do you know why? Because if the health plan includes routine blood screening, then when I recommend a blood test to an owner, they're much more likely to say yes, because it's free. They've already paid for it. It's in the plan. So the client, not only client concordance, but client compliance with my recommendations go up. And you know why I became a vet? I became a vet to advocate for and help animals. And if there's something that makes that easier, that's the beauty of working in this sector. If there's something that makes that easier, the vast majority of people are going to get on board with it.
I think that's true. I think I want to come back to your presentation, Tom. And there's a question that I've had actually, because you name checked and dropped quite a few big corporations there: Kodak, Blockbuster, Xerox, one of my favorite sort of 80s references. Listen, they couldn't get it right. They're multi-million, billion-pound organizations. You're sort of trying to say that a veterinary clinic can do it instead. Explain yourself, Tom. I'm a little curious as to why you think that.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, this is not a problem that goes away with scale. And if anything, I think it gets worse. And I think hubris means that we forget whether we're a dog or a cat, and we just think we can do anything. We forget where our distinct competence lies, and we stray into territories where we probably shouldn't be. We stray into selection environments that aren't going to be favorable for us. The thing that I've learned during the pandemic is just how agile independent veterinary practices are. You mentioned, that single site vet owner practice. They can make decisions like that. That's something that the executives at Kodak, Blockbuster, Xerox, wherever else, frankly, even Apple would die for, And so that's an advantage. That's no small advantage to a small business.
Do you think agility is in itself a plasmid that some bigger corporations might be looking to take from smaller, to kind of work a bit more agilely? Is that something that?
Well, look, if we really are to stretch the analogy to a breaking point,
I'm not sure we can.
The genetic code of a bacterium is simpler than of a more complex organism, say a human, right? And so a mutation is more likely to affect, an otherwise favorable mutation is more likely to throw other systems out of whack and become unfavorable in a more complex organism than in a simpler organism. And so if you have the beauty of simplicity, if you have very simple reporting lines, if you can make decisions quickly, be aware of that and use that. Because guess what? There are advantages of scale as well. And you don't have those. So you've got to know what you are, know who you are, know what your challenges are, but also know what your strengths are.
I think you talk about your experience. Obviously, you've got a very storied history of working with vet clinics in a multi-site operation. What's the time that you've had to sort of think on your feet, to mine your personal experience? What's the time that you've had to sort of adapt and change to stay ahead? Do you have any good anecdotes to draw from?
Yeah, I mean, talk about keeping me on my feet. You're doing a great job with these questions. But I think a really good one is when we introduced health plans to the business I was chief operating officer of in Asia. And we first introduced them in the clinic that I was working in Beijing. And they sold well. People wanted a way to do what their vet thought was best for their pet, and the pet health plan provided that, right? And then we opened a clinic in Shanghai. The pet health plan was doing well in Beijing. It hadn't really sold in Shanghai. You go to Shanghai and you ask, why do you think this is? Why do you think it's not so popular? Oh, in Shanghai, people are more commercially aware. They don't like the idea of this or that. And then when it really comes down to it, actually, it's the preconceived notion of the people in the clinic, the veterinary team, that is the barrier. And as soon as you took someone from a Beijing team that had seen the advantages and you planted them in the Shanghai hospital, suddenly pet health plans sold just as well. And that was true internationally, moving into Hong Kong and Singapore. And I think there's a real lesson there that often we have our own sort of barriers, maybe our immune system that rejects ideas without consideration. And we think, oh no, it's going to take too much time. I'm too busy. The team won't like it. They're already under stress, that kind of thing. And actually, we should be a little bit more open, and we should be scanning the environment for these things that we can apply to our business. I certainly didn't invent pet health plans. It was something already out there, and we just took it
and made it fit your own operations. We've got another question from Stephen here, who says, in your presentation, you said the benefits of mutability are context dependent. How do you know what that context is? I presume he's asking when it's time to mutate, in your opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out to say it's context dependent. There was a slide that I didn't put in my presentation. Let me see if I can just share my screen. I made it, but I left it out because I felt like we had enough. But seeing as though you ask.
I didn't ask. Even asked.
This is something called the rubber band model. Okay. And it was created by a professor at Stanford, Professor Bergelman, and he developed it with Andy Grove, great CEO from Intel. And I think this is the answer, right? It's meant to be a rubber band, so each part of the model can be pulled out, pulled this way, pulled that way, and you have to adapt to that. So it's asking, how does what you have, what you as an organization has, your team competencies, the equipment you have, whatever else it might be, the resources you have available, how does that compare to what it takes to win in your sector, in your niche, right? And here you can see they're in alignment. And then how does what you say compare to what you do, right? And here you can see they're all nicely in alignment. And then how these all intersect and interact affects your internal selection environment, which is just a fancy way of saying your culture, I think, right? And what the pandemic did was it changed what it takes to win in the environment, right? It also changed what you had. You suddenly had to mothball branches and potentially close clinics, furlough staff, whatever it might be. You weren't able to see people in person. When you did, you had to do it social distance. So these things just got flung apart. All right. It also changed what you did. Okay. And it meant that no longer fully resonated with what you're saying. We're there for you when you need us. Okay. But my dog's nails need clipping. Oh no, we can't do that. That's, obviously, that decision is a decision that needed to be made. But you were saying your messaging was always, we're there, we care, and then what you're doing, at least through some perspectives, is suddenly out of alignment with that. Okay, so I would always be thinking about this rubber band model and thinking, how do we bring these things back into alignment? Because if they're out of alignment, that means we need to adapt. We need to mutate. We need some mutability, whether that's co-opted from elsewhere or whether that's intrinsic in the house. And so I think the rubber band model is a great way to think about that.
You should have included that in your talk, Tom.
Well, it did now.
You did. You very much did. I suppose we've covered quite a lot of ground here, so it's probably a good time to start winding things down. I guess one of my final questions would be, if you were to add another animal or another thing to the model, would you? Do you think it's a perfect cat-dog dichotomy? Is there another evolutionary hero that we should be looking at in business context?
If you want me to apply ever more biological analogies, I'm more than happy to, but I think that's enough for one evening.
That is very fair. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Tom, thank you for putting together a fantastic presentation. Just a quick plug. We've got a webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time with Alan Robinson on clients are always right if you have the right clients. It's all specifically about filtration and its importance in your clinic.
Absolutely not to be missed.
Absolutely not to be missed. And yes, and lots of things coming up. Really grateful for your time, Tom. And thanks for joining us, everyone. Any final words, Tom, before we sign off?
No, thanks for coming along. And if you want a demo of Petshap, if you want to see what that particular bacterial plasmid can do for your business, go along to petshap.com and we'll be happy to arrange that for you. Thanks, Lewis.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks, everyone. Good night.
You could be larger than life, bigger than the world, living out the hopes and dreams of every boy and every girl. You could fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You could have all you ever wanted, shoot the moon and reach for Mars. You know you could. Yeah, and times are changing everywhere. Do we dream and do we dare? It's up to you, the door is open wide. Feel the rhythm of today, learn the part and join the play. The world is here, let's take it for a ride. You could be larger than life.